Welcome back, nerds. Fino here with a Servant Guide 2-for-1 special. Mecha Eli-chan Mark 1 and 2. They're the same servant in pretty much every way, aside from flavor. I lick robots so you don't have to. To save myself some breath, I'm gonna call both Mecha Eli. So that aside, let's look at her loadout. Skill 1 is Innocent Kaiju. This gives her passive star income and a multi-turn defense buff. In combination with her triple buster deck, Innocent Kaiju makes Mecha Eli into a functional brawler. Skill 2 is Overload Type 2. It gives her meter at the cost of dealing damage to Mecha Eli. 500 self-damage, while completely unnecessary, is negligible, and 20% meter is 20% meter. Can't argue with a self-charge. Skill 3 is Final Eli-chan. She gets substantial NP damage and crit buffs at the cost of purging her own defensive buffs. Because of the self-purge, you'll want to pop this first on any turn where it's relevant, and then overlay Innocent Kaiju or another defensive buff. I also want to point out that the self-purge isn't just for standard defense buffs. It removes damage reduction, evasion, invuln, and increased health. In exchange, you get 60% buffs in 2 categories, which is quite a lot as far as one-turn buffs go. I know it's not exactly a fair comparison, but Arjuna gets 30% buster and 20% NP damage for a single turn. Which, yeah, yikes. Mecha Eli's Noble Phantasm is Breast Zero Erzabet. It's a single target buster attack which purges defensive buffs, the same categories under Final Eli-chan, with a defense debuff tied to overcharge. Purging after damage is a bit of a hassle, but at the end of the day, you really just want a massive chunk of damage. With a bit of help from Final Eli-chan, that's exactly what you get. Before we talk about teams, we have a thorny issue to solve. Skill order. Conventional wisdom would have you max overload for that 20% battery. That's relevant for Oni-land farming, but for the big fight that's coming up where you want Mecha Eli, you'll get more mileage from Innocent Kaiju. It's a long, brawling boss fight with the equivalent of many break bars. But to make things even thornier, Final Eli-chan is your big killer buff and central to your combos. The best solution I could come up with is to prioritize Innocent Kaiju and then Final Eli-chan. Then you have about a year before a low-level overload becomes an issue. Now let's move on to teams. First up, we have a generic brawling setup with Mecha Eli and 2 berserkers. This one's nice for mixed 4 horseman encounters like an assassin boss with mixed rider enemies. You really don't want to run casters for this, but you might not have 3 gold zerks either. In this case, Mecha Eli is a viable substitute, and the big upside is that she gets first dibs on her own stars, with zerk star weights being very low. You don't have to use Penth and Tomcat. I just picked those because they're relevant for Halloween 3. Next up, we have another farming setup for mixed nodes, but this one emphasizes Mecha Eli's crit damage. Raiko can solo most second waves while generating a shitload of stars. This lets you stack up huge crit damage for Mecha Eli to clean up the final wave, especially if it has a foreigner boss. If you pull a bad hand, you'll be able to lean on your NP damage in combination with a charge donator. A very functional if not terribly sexy team. That is, unless you're roused by Raiko towering over all these nerds with twink physique. And finally, we come to the meme team. Mecha Eli-chan Mark 1 and 2 are pretty much the same character, but for the purposes of team building, they aren't treated as the same character. This means you can run both on the same team and even do a 3-piece with the right support. The downside is that there's not really a good reason to stack Mecha Elis. Unlike support casters or party buff servants, Mecha Eli has a very selfish kit, so you don't get any special advantage from running multiples. Not even Innocent Kaiju because all 3 have the same star weight. That said, star weight doesn't matter if you hit 50 stars every turn, and a few 2030s will take you above that mark. So with 3 Mecha Elis or someone else with Innocent Monster A, and 2 or 3 copies of 2030, you're guaranteed to crit with every card for 3 out of every 5 turns, with the option to crit extremely hard for any one of your idols. Maybe not the most practical setup, but it's a good laugh. He doesn't fit neatly into any of these teams, but I'd also like to mention the Amadeus Plug Suit Poster Girl combo, as you can switch him in with a full Mecha Eli hand and pop his 50-star skill for a massive burst turn. For craft essences, I'm going to make some obvious recommendations. If you're concerned about star absorption, go with Seal Designation Enforcer or Conversation on the Hot Sands. Limited Zero works with their triple buster deck, and Golden Sumo is the good shit. So take your pick. Mecha Eli is kind of a bare-bones servant with almost a year 1 skill set. In that respect, she's quite underwhelming, but many of you will find her unnecessary evil for the simple reason that she's a free alter ego servant. If you don't have Meltrilus, she's the only game in town for single target damage. Alter egos are the only servants with both offensive and defensive class advantage against foreigners, and while these are rare, they're incredibly tough to deal with. Oni-land is a notable case where one of the endgame farming nodes has a foreigner class final boss, and for a lot of players, Mecha Eli is going to be the only viable way of clearing it. Just think of it like you're a cop getting a new partner, or getting an arranged marriage, to a robot. That's all, folks. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more, and follow me on Twitch where I stream FGO and other games every weekend. See you there.